Kia Sorento is one of the most popular midsize crossovers on the market, and it's just been given a refresh. So is it still a winner? What's up, folks? I'm Dave Undercoffler, Head of Consumer Insights for CarGurus. Kia gave the Sorento a healthy update for 2024 that included a new face up front, new tech on the inside, and a new trim level. Meanwhile, the gas, hybrid, and plug-in hybrid powertrains carry on unchanged. So is all that enough to stay at the front of the pack? Let's go spend some time with one and find out. But before we do, be sure to like and subscribe to this channel so you can get alerts on all of our future updates. All right, let's start by taking a look at the outside. As I mentioned, one of the biggest changes Kia made to this Sorento for 2024 is a completely redesigned front end. And what's interesting is that this generation of Sorento really isn't that old. It's only been out for a few years, but Kia still thought it was time to give it a new face. So dramatic changes. Some people think it looks a little bit like the larger Telluride. I'm not quite seeing that there, but there are some really cool design elements. I like these LED daytime running lights. They go all the way across this top here and then down the side. They're also orange, which is a little unique these days. Meanwhile, the grille, the bumper, everything you see here has been completely redesigned. All right, let's take a look at the side. Quick word before we do on pricing. This starts at about $33,000, including destination for a base front-wheel drive model, and then goes all the way up to about $50,000 for a fully loaded all-wheel drive version. The one we're testing today is nearly loaded. It's right at the top. It's $48,200 for this all-wheel drive version, and again, that does include destination. In terms of dimensions, the Sorento's in a little bit of a Goldilocks zone. It's bigger than something like a Toyota RAV4 or Honda CR-V, but then it's smaller than the full-size three-row crossovers. If you're looking for that, that would be stepping up to Kia's larger Telluride. This does offer 3 rows of seats on some trims, including the one we're testing today. I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. Finally, at the back, Kia really didn't make too many changes to the styling of this refresh for the Sorento. It's got a nice sort of rugged look going on back here. I like kind of the contrast bumper down below. You also may notice there's a camera here and one here. This is your standard backup camera, and because we're testing a fully loaded version, it has a digital rear view mirror. The camera for that is right up here. All right, as I mentioned, the powertrains haven't changed from the earlier version of this Sorento, so that means there are 2 different gas engines available. Base models will get a 2.5-liter non-turbocharged 4-cylinder engine that makes 191 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. It's paired with an 8-speed automatic transmission and either front-wheel drive or all-wheel drive. Meanwhile, mid to higher grade trims of the Sorento are going to get this engine that we're testing today. This is a turbocharged 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine. It makes 281 horsepower and 311 pound-feet of torque. It's paired with an 8-speed dual-clutch automatic transmission and standard all-wheel drive. Then there's the hybrid and the plug-in hybrid versions. The hybrid offers 227 horsepower from a smaller turbocharged engine, while the plug-in hybrid has 261 horsepower and offers 31 miles of all-electric range. All right, now let's take a look at the interior. This is another area where Kia made some of the biggest changes for that 2024 model refresh. That includes new screens. Previously, it was more of a traditional setup where this is more split up and you had a more traditional instrument panel. Now you have a digital display in front of you and then a digital display for the infotainment system. Really nice redesign, kind of opens up the cabin. You can't really see it because it's kind of the same color as the rest of the trim, but this is a fake wood trim along here. You've got brushed metal accents. It really opens up the cabin, gives it a nice airy, modern feel, so I like that. I also really like this screen. It's bright, it's responsive to your touch, it has wireless Apple CarPlay and wireless Android Auto. It's really easy to use, the menus are really intuitive. I like that as well. But the biggest thing I don't like about this entire vehicle is down below, and that's because Kia redesigned its whole setup with buttons down here. So if you'll notice right now, we have the climate control displaying here, right? 2 knobs for the different temperatures for driver and passenger, and then in between it, a touch-sensitive panel for the rest of the controls. But that panel also controls, if you hit that, it controls the menu for the infotainment system. And what's so frustrating about this setup is that we don't realize how often we're using both functions simultaneously, right? So maybe you want to turn the heat up a little bit and then at the same time or right after that, you want to turn the volume. Well, to get between those 2 functions, you've got to hit this little touch sensitive panel. It changes the function of those buttons. It may seem small, but as you're driving this vehicle throughout the week, as we've been testing it, it gets so frustrating. I just wish Kia had made 2 sets of buttons so everything is there at the same time. Another thing that's really annoying is that this little panel that toggles it back and forth, you've got to take your eyes off the road while you're driving to look down and make sure you're hitting it properly. It's so frustrating. Not a deal breaker. This is a great vehicle overall, but just a heads up, if you are interested in the Sorento, it's going to take a little bit of a learning curve. Otherwise, the rest of the cabin is really nicely executed. These seats are very comfortable, really nice side bolstering on them. As I mentioned, really nice materials throughout the cabin. We're in a fully loaded version, so we've got a panoramic moonroof above me. We've got the digital rear view mirror that I mentioned earlier. We also have heated and cooled seats, wireless smartphone charging, lots of cubbies. It has a physical shifter, which I do love. A lot of cars today are switching to something like buttons or a rotary knob. This is old school, and I like that. Everywhere you look, everything is presented very nicely. So overall, a really nice cabin. All right, turning to the second row, a couple of things I want to point out. The model we're testing actually has captain's chairs. You will get a bench seat on other trims of the Sorento. And then in terms of space, like I said, the Sorento is a little bit bigger than some other mid-size crossovers, something like a RAV4 or a CR-V. And what I like is that it's big, but not too big. So right now I've got this seat set up for my height. I'm 6'1". This seat is where I would have it if I were driving. So basically I'm sitting behind myself, and there's plenty of room, plenty of headroom, room for my legs, my feet. And what's really cool is that this seat actually could go up more, or I can go back even further if there's no one in the third row behind me. So tons of space, tons of flexibility. That's a real highlight of this Sorento. Meanwhile, our loaded trim has a lot of amenities back here that are really pretty cool. One thing I really like, built into each of these seats is a USB-C charge port. That's a great placement for it. Down below, we also have just a common household plug. We have heated seats here and a nice little sunshade for when the little ones are taking a nap. All right, now I'm sitting in the third row, and again, I'm 6'1". I've got this middle seat adjusted to where I would have it, and then also the driver's seat. So basically now, there are three of me sitting behind one another, and the space is actually pretty good back here. These third row seats are to be thought of as kind of, you need them at some point, but you're not gonna use them all the time, especially for adults. The floor is a little high, so as you can see, it makes my knees sit up a little too high, and also headroom is pretty tight. The back here sort of slopes down, so I do end up hitting my head on the ceiling. But legroom is decent, and you've got some visibility out of the cabin. So again, for adults, this really is more of an emergency use, but for kids, you could probably put them back here somewhat regularly. Another thing I want to point out is that this middle seat is actually in its middle position. So if there were someone shorter sitting here, you could slide it closer to the front and to give this person back here a little bit more room. And then in terms of amenities, you actually have a few back here. Each side has its own USB-C charge port. There are also a number of cup holders. And then there's a variety of buttons that move this seat out of the way. There's a set over here on the passenger side. Each of these middle seats has a button on top of it, so the third row can get to that very easily. And then there's a button on the bottom of this seat for when you're standing in the door. Finally, at the back, as you can see, cargo space is pretty minimal when you have the third row of seats folded up. You could put a few things back here, but fortunately, these seats fold very easily. And once they're down, they're completely flat, and you've got a lot more cargo space. This is a really functional vehicle when those are folded. All right, next up, driving impressions. And as I mentioned earlier, our tester has the turbo engine. So this is 281 horsepower and then an 8-speed dual clutch transmission. They work really well together. This has got good amounts of power. Now, if you're on the fence about whether you should go with the base engine or spend a little more money for this more powerful engine, I would say get this turbo. The base is gotta feel just sort of underpowered. This version that we're testing never really feels overwhelming. 281 feels like it's working pretty hard. So I have to think the base with 191 horsepower just isn't gonna cut it. But one of the downsides to this turbo engine is it's pretty thirsty when it comes to fuel economy. We've been testing it so far over about 150 miles. Most of those miles have been on the freeway, and we're only averaging about 20 miles per gallon. That's really not great considering this isn't a particularly large vehicle, so just keep that in mind. The only other nitpick we have about how this Sorento drives is that it's a little noisy on the road. A little too much road noise comes into the cabin, especially when you're traveling at high freeway speeds. So again, not a deal breaker, but just something to consider. Otherwise, the ride quality is pretty good. It's on the sportier side. It's a little on the stiffer side, but not uncomfortable. It's just gonna have a little better handling, a little better feedback when you're on a curvy road like this, and I like that trade-off. Meanwhile, the steering and the brakes have a really nice feel. Again, kind of on the sporty side, but I like that. And then there's visibility. Visibility is good, but not great. Out the front, it's pretty good, but when you look over your shoulder, this B-pillar right here is a little too thick, so I don't love that. All right, folks, there you have it, our review of the 2025 Kia Sorento. Pros, well, we really like the number of powertrains available, from the base gas to the turbo to the hybrid and the plug-in hybrid version. We also like that it offers a third row in this segment. That's pretty rare. And finally, this is just a very well-rounded vehicle that we think is going to appeal to a lot of buyers. Cons, well, the big one is that switchable panel on the interior for the climate control and the infotainment system. Plus, there's a little too much road noise seeping into the cabin, and our turbo model was a little thirsty at the gas pump. But overall, we really do like this Sorento. We think it's a great addition to anyone's shopping list who's looking for a Goldilocks zone type of crossover that can do it all. So for reviews or listings of this Sorento or anything else you're shopping for, new or used, be sure to check out CarGurus.com. And before you go, like and subscribe to this channel so you can get alerts on all of our future updates. Thanks for watching.